hands up if you're making a game. I mean, I'm hoping most of you got hands up. All right. I'll start with you first. Green shirt. What game are you making? That's not telling me what need you're fulfilling. Tell me the need you're fulfilling in your game. But this is the point. And the thing is, you haven't said an emotional response. You know, I want to delight sports fans with a simple way to express management of a game, of a sport or something. That would be one way of describing. I want a first-person shooter that... Perfect. See, that's it. Say that again. Drifting game in a crowded city. Can you feel the need in that? There's an emotion in that, isn't there? We've immediately connected with an emotional response, and you can identify who is going to respond to that. By knowing what it is emotionally we're communicating, we have a chance of finding them. When we talk about we're going to make a mobile game that's going to be addressing people who are on the bus, it's not really doing the same thing, is it? We know it's a mobile, we know but that's more of the mechanics. But a drifting game in the heart of a city is telling us an emotion. Human beings like stories. We need to know what that story is, we need to know what that connection is, we need to know what that connection will do to help entertain us when we're making games. I think you had a hand up for making a game. What game are you making? What game are you guys making? So your emotional need you're feeling is the desire to create stories together. Now that's a really interesting description as well, isn't it? Think about that. Desire to create stories together. There's an obvious need that you're fulfilling with that description. So that's the kind of stuff we're trying to get to when we're talking about this. So this isn't just random words. This is actually a complete philosophy about being successful in a game. You know, this is probably the most important thing you're going to hear, I think, this week. But then I'm biased because I said it. So what are you making and why? We're kind of getting to that now, aren't we? Because we're saying about emotional needs that we're describing, but why are we making those? Why do you want to satisfy that need to express sharing and making stories together? Why is that important to you? For your fun, just for fun. Is that enough? I mean, it could be. I mean, do we think it's enough? Is that enough of a reason to make it? What does success look like if that's the reason for making it? Because, frankly, that could be it. I make the game, done, no, I can walk away. Because I've succeeded, I've made the game for fun. I don't think that's the only reason you're making it. Yeah, exactly. So I think, I'm guessing, part of the reason we want to make it is because we love making. Anyone who doesn't love making games, actually put my hand down. Anyone who doesn't love making games. Now, hands up if you do love making games. Now, I'm going to confess, making games is the second worst thing in the world to do. The worst thing in the world is not making games. I love that joke. Anyway, so why are we making it matters? Because why allows us to understand what success looks like. If we know what success looks like, it makes it a lot easier to plan and budget accordingly. If you're Supercell and you're not trying to make $1 billion game, what the hell are you doing? Because you've got the resources, the budget, the market scope, the addressable potential to do that. You'd be wasting your company opportunity if you weren't looking for $1 billion games. But if you're a two-man band indie that's maybe got enough money to buy noodles for a couple of months, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, then you know what kind of budget you've got. You also know what success looks like, because to buy a few more packets of noodles, or maybe having something other than noodles for lunch, would be quite nice. And that's a different scale. That's the opposite end of the scale. For me, success is being able to make the next game. But being able to make the next game is sometimes not enough, because games fail. Most games fail. Something like, let's give you some horrible, scary stats, okay? Who knows how many games were launched every day last year on iOS? Anyone? How much? 200? Thousands? 500? That's the Slava's closest. 450 every day on average. And that actually accelerated. In February 2015, it was 362 games every day. By the end of the year, the average was 450. That's a scary, scary number. So people are not making fewer games. Okay, anyone know what the average, sorry, let's not say average, let's say median revenue. So the 50% or lower, how much do they make? Lifetime value for a game. No, it's more higher than zero. It is close, but slightly higher. It's actually $400 lifetime value for a game. 450 every day. $400 on average they make. What percentage of people are paying in free-to-play games of the numbers of download? I don't like that stat, but let's use that because it's an easy one to understand. What percentage of people who download are paying in a free-to-play game? Anyone know? 1%, 2% is about right. 2% is probably more typical. There are still games out there that get something like 10%, but they tend to be lower scale, and they tend to be very niche. But yeah, it's about that kind of level. 2% is probably a good way of understanding it. But there's been a really big increase in ad-funded based games, and that's not what this talk is about. We'll talk about that another time. So we're dealing with a really scary number. Oh, what percentage break even? What percentage of games break even, do you think? 2%. And 1% represents about 80% of the total revenue. That's just, it's really steep curve. And so the reason for saying all that kind of stuff is we have to have a good set of reasons. We have to understand what it is we're trying to do and why, so we can know what our success looks like. And we can know what's attainable and plan for it. Also, we can know what obstacles we're facing. Because it's important, isn't it? We don't just want to have to deal with the problems. We have to know what obstacles are and how we overcome them. We have to plan for that. So let's try and think about how we're going to do that. So we talk about this, what need are we fulfilling? This is the primary driver. If we understand what levers we have, if we understand the drifting game through a city or the shared narrative, doing narratives together, those mechanisms are allowing us to find out how we can overcome a lot of the barriers that we're going to face. But we still have to ask this question. Why should anyone care? Seriously. I didn't make your game. Why should I care about your game? You've got to communicate to me very quickly why I should care. If I'm going to do anything, if I'm going to make a download, if I'm going to install it, if I'm going to play it, if I'm going to actually engage in your game in any way, shape, or form, you have already had to have convinced me your game is worth putting that effort in. Because if you don't, guess what happens? Anyone? Nothing. No one does anything. If they don't believe in you, they're not going to do a thing. So getting this right is incredibly important. But it's not enough. Why would they care enough to play your game and keep playing? How often do you think about that? With your drifting city game, how often are you thinking about 3 months later, why are they still playing? Always. Great. Good. You're in the right place. But we have to think about that. We have to put that into our design. We have to make our game design accessible and sustainable. This matters. I've got a good friend of mine called Barry Mead. He works in a studio called Fireproof. They do a game called The Room. Anyone seen The Room? Barry has often said he's never spent any money on marketing. I called him out on it, told him that was bullshit. He puts the money into the game design, which he freely admits. And when he talked about it, we had this really fun conversation at an event in London. And what he does is he thinks about a game idea which he and his audience will love, and then thinks, how can I make this easier to access? How can I get this easier to show off to other people why it's good? He actively thinks inside the product, the game itself, how to make it more engaging to as wide an audience as possible, not just his primary audience. That's at the heart of this idea of why should anyone care enough to keep playing? And why should they keep playing and keep paying? The thing about, one of the decisions you're going to have to make about price, we'll get to price later, is the obvious one, free or paid. And again, I don't want to go into that too much now because we will talk about price. But you're going to have to make this kind of decision. One of the key things to understand about making that decision is, will people pay once or many times? What will make them want to keep paying? If you don't know what that is in the design of your game, guess what? That choice isn't yours anymore. It's been made for you because you've just basically destroyed your chances of having something different. So, anyone confused what this is to do with marketing yet? I hope not, because what I'm trying to get across to you is marketing starts with the game. It starts with the design. It's not good enough to make a good game without considering who's going to play it. Because by understanding who's going to play it, where they are, and what they're going to do, and what's going to keep them playing, and what's going to get them to tell their friends about it, you haven't got the most successful chance. You've kind of killed off your opportunities before you've even got going. So understanding how these relationships work, understanding that it's actually not about the product, but it's about the people, which is basically product is an old-fashioned way of looking at what we do. We're actually making experiences for people. And making experiences for people means we have to understand who that person is. Who is that person who is going to care about the drifting game in the city or the narrative game which we do together? Who is the together? Who are those people? And also, what's the consequence of having a game which is reliant and dependent on having more than one person engaging in it? And what complications does that add to the setting up of that experience? Have you thought about all of those stages? Because they're all part of your core message as a game developer. And that's important because if you can't communicate that, no one will care. And we want them to care. But why? Why will they care? And this is a really interesting thing. Just because I like something doesn't mean I'm going to play it. I'm going to give you an example of a really great game that I don't play. Hearthstone. Anyone like Hearthstone? It's a great game, isn't it? Really great game. You play Hearthstone? No? But I'm sorry. But Hearthstone is a really, really great game. And I don't play it because I'm always on a train or a plane when I want to play it. And I can't because it requires an internet connection. I can't play it. And actually, the amount of time it takes to play that game for a single round is relatively long. But it's funny how I've been able to play Clash Royale, which also needs an internet connection, because the incident, the moment of play, is short enough for me to get one sneaky game in the morning when I'm next in Wi-Fi coverage and when I'm next in Wi-Fi coverage again. So I get enough of a slot to be able to play that. But I can't do that with Hearthstone because I can't even get into the experience. Oh, let's go on in. So how does the game not only suit the person, but their daily routine? How much time do you spend thinking about the person's other things, other needs, other activities? We need to think about that because we're going to create a context in which our game fits and works. Do they have the devices? I mean, think about VR, okay? So for VR, we're going to need, by the way, I'm a big fan of VR, but let's just explore the hurdles. I've got to have the right goggles. I've got to be willing to put them on. I've got to be in a place where I can put those goggles on and not feel intimidated by someone else. I've got to have the right hardware to run whatever it is that needs those goggles to work. I've then got to go to the right store and have bought the right game and have the right time available to do all of that. Does that sound simple to you? If you have a choice between playing a VR game that's of equal interest and a tablet game, which you could just take out of your bag and play, which are you going to do? No. Obvious tablet game. But remember, I did say, importantly, of equal interest. And obviously, we do know there's a little magic when it comes to VR, that, what's the word I use for it? Lots of different ways of describing it, but that sense of presence, that real kind of immersion that you get inside VR is probably worth it. But only to people who already care. So it's going to take some time before that becomes as big as it will. I think it will become big, but it's going to take time. So do they have the devices, the time to play, and the time to play regularly? That's another important thing. We need to know who these audiences are. How many of them are there? Are they really going to be convinced by what we're going to talk about? Where can we find them? How can we talk to them? This is the kind of stuff we need to think about. And why are they going to stop doing what they're already doing for you? Do you think about that when you design a game? Why is someone going to stop playing Hearthstone to play your game? Why is someone going to stop going to the cinema this evening because they've got a quick round of your game to play? How many people are going to stop picking up the Kindle to read their favorite book to play your game on the bus? That's the kind of stuff we need to think about. We need to create calls to action that excite and deliver anticipation so that they can do nothing but play that game. I'm not talking about manipulating people here. This is not evil science, mysticism. We can't control people's minds. We can just offer them cool choices, interesting things to do, things that they feel that they're missing out on if they don't do it. And that matters because our game's worthwhile, isn't it? Do we think our games are worthwhile? Anyone? I know I do. Go on, hands up. And if you're not, why are you making a game if you don't think your game's worthwhile? Come on. Seriously. So, we need to know who our primary audience is. We genuinely need to know who they are. And we need to name them. Seriously. We need to name them. We need to know who they are, and we need to give them a name. Now, it's a bit of a trick, because when we give a name to something that's abstract, that we've thought it up, and this is our instinct, there's no data at this point, we'll get to data later, but we're making a guess at who we think our target audience is. And by naming them, there's something psychologically that we do about attributing personality to those individuals. And we could talk about kind of their age, their sex, their location, how they identify themselves in gender. All of these things matter, but really importantly, how you think they should be named allows you to shortcut a lot of mental processes. Because when you talk about, I don't know, in England I might say a Kevin, and a Kevin has a certain set of associations in my head. I don't know about what names have associations in Poland, but I mean, I'm sure you have associations with different names and different people, even if it's just people you know. I'm not saying your target audience is John, your next door neighbor. I'm not saying that. But you might have a target audience based on Jean, who's a little bit like your neighbor's wife, but also a little bit like somebody you went to school with. And we're creating this imaginary person around whom we can define certain characteristics and certain behaviors, because it allows us to start thinking. It's a thought experiment. What games do they play? What media do they consume? These are really important things. How engaged are they with social media? Now, if you know a person or a set of people who have these characteristics, by associating this name that you've given this primary audience person, John, age 46, he's an IT help desk person in a big financial company. He manages a team of 14 people. He likes playing Clash Royale. He reads Viz, which is a really old school joke, British thing, which I can't really explain. He doesn't read the newspapers anymore, but he does occasionally look at Reddit, but he's a bit baffled about how upping things or down, voting things up and down works. He kind of, we're a picture that a narrative for ourselves to make decisions. So we know a lot about these people automatically because we're basing them on individuals. What art style attracts them? What role does games play in their daily routine? So we're now starting to answer some of the questions we were asking before in the embodiment of a fictitious individual. What devices do they play with primarily? For example, is my John a lapsed PC gamer who used to play Unreal Tournament and Quake 3, but he stopped doing that when 14-year-olds started headshotting him in Halo? And it's me, basically. He can't play Halo anymore because he basically can't explore the map because it's already killed before he gets there. And so he switched to tablet games because they're less frenetic and he can keep up with them. But he wants something that reminds him of the glory days of being a great shooter. These are things you know instinctively about John because you've created his fictitious identity, and it's a vehicle to allow your imagination to answer the questions you have about your own game. It's giving you permission to ask questions. That's the point of this persona process. Then who's the secondary audience? The secondary audience is not allowed to overlap your primary audience in any way. This is really important. If you're going to try and use a technique where you're going to use personas to understand how to communicate to a wider audience, you're going to have to force yourself to have a thought experiment where Jean is not like John. Jean is 37. She's a mum. She also works as a consultant in pensions. We make a whole bunch of new criteria that cannot be the same as John's. The reason we're doing this is we're trying to challenge ourselves of who would really play this game. We're trying to find the other channels that we can explore so we can broaden our scope to communicate. We're trying to find out the other needs that players might have and still enjoy this game. It's a really important thing to get right. And the tertiary audience, so the third group of people, the third person we're going to name, come up with imaginary age, sex, location, gender identity, whatever else it might be, again, cannot be anything that overlaps with your primary, secondary audiences. So does this all make sense? We're creating imaginary people to guess at things about what we think our game's going to be good at doing to help them communicate and understand our game. But then we've got to test it. Making these thought experiments is incredibly powerful. Let's face it, Einstein's discovery of E equals mc squared happened because of a series of thought experiments which were then tested through data. So it's not a ridiculous thing to come up with, use your imagination to come up with possible answers, provided you test it. And test it with whatever data you can afford. Because frankly, most of you is not going to have thousands of dollars to spend on primary and secondary research, are you? I mean, can you spend $10,000 on running a consumer research program that's going to talk to, say, 20,000 people on internet survey, 3,000 people in person? It's probably going to cost a lot more than that, by the way. But that's the kind of stuff that I would do when I was at Sony, or what I would do when I was at 3, the mobile operator, because we could. We would come up with these personas, we would look at what our assumptions were, and then we would test them. But there's nothing to stop us asking the Johns and Jeans of who we know about what they think, and to test that data and constantly revise our thinking to make sure that we understand who our audience are to the best of our ability. That's the important thing, is we're doing things to the best of our ability. No marketing process is perfect. A lot of data can be misunderstood because you've looked at the wrong decimal point, you've averaged the wrong things, you've tried to make assumptions in ways where your data doesn't actually provide proof. But if we take our assumptions, we test what we can, we at least have a fighting chance. So personas is really the key thing about understanding product. Understanding the things that we're going to make. I think hopefully that makes sense. We're trying to make sure we make not just a great game because we want to make the game, because we're having fun. I hope we do have fun making it, because frankly, don't make it if it's not fun. Make it because it's a great thing to make. But actually, by taking this process and actually applying a thought experiment, we can have a lot of fun trying to understand who these people are, what they're going to love out of playing the game, how we can communicate to them, and how we can deliver a better experience than we might have done if we just took our simple idea of a game that people create stories by sharing, or a game which is about drifting through I've forgotten the phrase now, but it's through a deserted city. This is really important stuff, and it sounds trivial. It sounds like it's made up. It sounds like a few people, get drunk and make a joke at the developers. No, this is real work. Genuinely is real work. I honestly have had to do this so many times. Price. We've got our product. We know the product we're going to make. Price. What are we going to make? How are we going to make money out of our game? That's a really important factor. Obviously, in a mobile space, free is pretty much the norm, and paid is something that's challenging. Steam is probably a paid game, although saying that, something like 60% of Steam revenues are made by free-to-play games, which is interesting. Even on console, there are lots of free-to-play games. I used to be involved with one, PlayStation Home, shut down now, but we were making, we had 38 million downloads, 3 million monthly active users, 3% spending £11 a month as a free-to-play experience on a console. And that was shut down a couple of years ago. But it's interesting when you look at it. These assumptions that we make aren't necessarily clear-cut. It's not just about free or paid. It's about understanding the impact that price has. So let's give you an example. If I'm going to choose to get a game and it's going to cost me, whereas I could download it and try it out for free, what's more attractive? It's pretty obvious, isn't it? But it's not always. It's interesting because I'll show you stats in a second, but there's an interesting results from a survey. We're starting to see people not liking in-app purchase as a method of paying. And there's a whole bunch of reasons. We'll go into some of those reasons in a bit. So it's not as clear-cut. I'll give you another example. If you pay up front, and your tutorial is rubbish, you'll probably plow your way through the experience, won't you? Because you've already invested. You've already put your money into the game. So, of course, you're going to carry on paying for it, aren't you? You're going to carry on playing the game because you've already spent. But a free-to-play game, if the tutorial is rubbish, what do? Sure, gone. There's countless other games I could be playing, paid or free. More games than I could possibly play in my lifetime. More good games than I could possibly play in my lifetime as well. And we still want to make games. We're crazy. Seriously. Well, I don't think we're crazy. Because making games is a worthwhile exercise, and obviously tastes move on, and we can add to the language of gameplay. I think that's why I'm here. I don't just want to make money. I want to add to the language of game design. That's what makes me excited. That's my success criteria. So I'm going to give you an example. There's some questions about how honest this experiment was, but I'm going to tell you the experiment as it was described to me. So the idea is, imagine I'm going to offer you a Lindt chocolate and a Hershey's Kiss. Does everyone know what a Hershey's Kiss is? Yeah? How would you describe them in one word? Really? For me, they're disgusting. Oh, Hershey's Kisses are the most disgusting chocolate on the planet. Genuinely. I mean, I'm very surprised. I'm glad for you that you love Hershey's Kisses, but the popular consensus is Hershey's Kisses are the most disgusting chocolates on the planet. I'm sorry. Lindt chocolate, it's good one for you. But compared to a Lindt chocolate, have you tried a Lindt chocolate? Yeah. Wow. Lindt's popular in Poland? Yeah. Lindt is one of the nicest chocolates on the planet, according to consensus. I did actually visit the Lindt factory once. In my very early career, I was selling software for recipe management, and I visited most of the chocolate factories in Europe, including Lindt factory, which is amazing, by the way. There's you go into the main building, and then there's this gangway across the chocolate factory. Oh, the most amazing smell on the planet. I almost wish I was still doing that, except it wasn't games. But yes, no, I don't work for Lindt. But apart from personal tastes, the idea was that you would sell, in this experiment, you'd sell people for 15 cents a Lindt chocolate. Or for 1 cent, that's how bad most people think Lindt chocolates are. And I'm glad you enjoyed it, because somebody has to. 1 cent for the Lindt chocolate. Guess what percentage of people bought The Lindt chocolate versus the Hershey's Kiss. Anyone want to make a guess? 50-50? 70% Lindt chocolate? 70% Hershey's Kiss? Anyone? It's just a little chocolate. It's a bit disgusting, but someone likes it. Yeah, it's hard to describe in any other way. I won't say it's vomit on a wrapper because that's a bit too much. Sorry. I'm going to get my coat. Anyway, the answer is 70% of people bought the Lindt chocolate. It's that much better. But there are other people like you who like like Hershey's Kisses. 30% of people did go for the Hershey's Kiss at the 1 cent price point. Another interesting thing. They reduced the price of both by 1 cent. So the Lindt chocolate was now 14 cents, and the Hershey's Kiss was 1 cent. Sorry, 0 cents. Free. Go on, engage your brain. So now we've gone from 15 cents Hershey's Kiss to 14, and at 15 cents, 70% of people bought the Lindt chocolate. Hershey's Kiss was 1 cent, now free. What percentage went for the Hershey's Kiss as free? We've got 90, anyone else? 14 cents. It was 70%. So 70% went for the Hershey's Kiss when it was free. Because, like I say, 30% of the population realized that the Hershey's Kisses are disgusting. But then it does say that 70% of the population thought it was good enough to have for free. So maybe my earlier description was a bit harsh. But the point of this is, free isn't just linear. It's not, I reduced the price by 1 cent on both parts, therefore there should be a proportionate increase. No, it was overwhelming. Free has an overwhelming impact because free doesn't require reciprocation. Free actually gives me a chance to test at no cost other than the effort to unwrap the experience. So when I'm going to an app store and I'm seeing a free to download, cheers. When I go to an app store and I see a free to experience thing, am I thinking of it in the same way that I would if I was buying a game up front? No, of course I'm not. That's why I don't like when we say 2% of free-to-play payers pay, because actually that's not a fair comparison, because we're dealing with 2% of the people who bothered to look at the back of the screen grab, effectively, because there hadn't been any commitment at that point. Why should we expect people who've paid up front to be equivalent to people who've downloaded something for free? Is that a fair equivalence? So again, it's one of those long ongoing debates I don't want to bore you with, but it's one of those things that wrangles me. The important part of this is price has an effect. If we have a paid up front game, we are going to go through the pain of the tutorial because we've already invested our money in this game. We want to get our money's worth. If we have a free-to-play game, we have no such commitments. And we as designers have to work ourselves to the bone just to get you to try it out. Because we've already given you all of the experience that you wanted for free. Why should you carry on doing it? Why should you care when it was free? Going free-to-play is actually harder, requires more discipline, requires scale. It's a tricky thing to do. So we're going to try and talk about that as well. Anyway, so P is for price. The price is more complicated. It's really interesting. This is the thing I was saying earlier. We did this survey. I think it was about 2,000, maybe 3,000 people. It was an online survey, so of course it's self-reported. 11% said they preferred in-app purchase as a method of payment, as opposed to 18% who said they preferred pay up front. Now, how many of you think that's odd? Or is it just okay? Anyone think that's odd? You think it's odd? Why do you think it's odd? I'd like to see if you think the same reason I do. If you're free, I should just try it. Exactly. So the really interesting thing for me on this is if I am in an experience, the cost of acquisition to get you to buy another thing in every other market is about 1/3 of the cost. So if I'm in a sports arena and you've come to my sports arena and I'm selling you a hot dog, you're about 3 times more likely to buy a hot dog inside my sports arena than to come into my sports arena in the first place. So if I've already got you in my game experience, you should be much easier to convert to wanting all this other gorgeous stuff. So we've clearly done something wrong in the way that we communicate the value of in-app purchase if it's less popular than having to pay up front. Now, there are obviously mitigating circumstances to that. So, for example, the fact that we have ad-funded mechanisms, particularly ad-funded mechanisms like opt-in video ads, which are obviously things that we choose that don't block our experience. I mean, obviously, we're seeing a rise in that kind of interest. But even then, there's something not quite right, I think. So we have to think about how price affects gameplay. We have to think about how price affects the experience of the player. And it's not just a simple question of, oh, everyone else has gone free, therefore we will, and therefore it'll be easy. No. We have to understand the value proposition. We have to understand that scale matters. Because if you're going to have people who are going to come in and look at our game once, why would you go free to play? If you've got a game that only can be played through once, practically, you have to be a really, enthusiastic, fanatic to play it twice. There's no point in even thinking about going free. That would be insane. But if you've got a fantastic piece of joy that people want to just try, oh yeah, I'll have that every few minutes, I'll have another little taste, I want another little taste. Well, that seems pretty obvious to me that that's a perfect routine, perfect kind of pattern of play that would kind of fit. So it has a fundamental impact on the kinds of games we want to make and why. So I think we need to spend time thinking about that and the scale of the audience. How many people out there want that kind of game? Do we really have an addressable audience who are actually going to be interested in this style of play? Because if we don't, how are we going to get the throughput of people to be able to get enough money to make the next one? I'm not suggesting we're going to instantly become, super billionaires, but I'd like to get enough money from the game I make to make the next one. Another thing that's really interesting is scale isn't just about numbers of people who come in. Scale is also about how long they stay and how much they repeat. Another example of this is Crossy Road. I'm a big fan of Crossy Road, and I had a privilege of sitting in a room doing a talk with him in Matthew Hall from Hipster Whale in Amsterdam a couple of years ago. We had a fantastic talk about how they were using video ads. And the really kind of big takeaway for me was when he was talking about how he was inspired by other games, by the fact that when you went to play them, there was like, I think Disco Zoo was an example he gave. You went to an enclosure with one of the animals, and there was a thing that was going on in that space, and there was always a reason why I might want to spend some time watching a video ad in order to then get some speeding up process, some benefit in play. There was always a reason why there would be many points where I wouldn't feel like it was intruding in my gameplay. That means that instead of having an ad that stops me from playing, and then I go away and play, you can't show that too often, because that's going to be really annoying, isn't it? But if I want that ad, the frequency that people would watch an ad might go up 20, 30 times in a day. Now, don't go do that. I mean, be careful and think about the experience and make sure it's all good. But think about how people will access and repeat and play consistently. Repeatability and retention are matter. But it's also worth thinking, and again, this is all part of your marketing process. Because if you don't understand how people are going to engage with your game, if you don't understand how they're going to spend money in your game, how do you know what budgets to put into it? How do you know what your market potential for your game is? How do you know whether you're making the right things or not that are going to be able to make you able to make the next game? And there's a piece of psychology called consumer behavior as risk, which I kind of stole this to make this. So basically, what it's saying is people basically don't buy things unless you create anticipation or a fear of missing out or social capital. Unless you've got those factors to convince people that what you're offering them is worthwhile, they won't buy it. And it's not just buying, by the way. This is downloading as well. What is it about your experience that's going to convince them that actually I can set aside, abnegation, by the way, is a horribly awkward word, but it's only one that says in one word what I was trying to get across. Abnegation of your responsibility means I will set aside the things I ought to be doing, like the washing up, or paying my bills, or whatever else I should be doing right now, vacuuming, because frankly I need a break. So I'm going to set those aside. That's the kind of thing we need. We need to create reasons, motivations for people to set aside their needs. We need to set clear, defined reasons why they should expect delight. Delight's a really fascinating one. There was two psychologists called Park and Lee in South Korea, did a study on buying behavior inside games, in-app purchases. I often do this sort of comment, so some of you may have heard the joke before, but it's not really a joke, but you'll get the idea. Hands up if you think people spend money because they like your game. Do you think people spend money because they like your game? No, they don't. It helps. Don't get me wrong, it helps. They don't spend it because they like your game. How many people think you spend money because you like the developer? Yeah, I wish that was true. I so wish that was true. That's a fair point, well made. Friends of the developer. Hey, you say that. I'm doing a Kickstarter. There's a lot of my friends who aren't backing me right now, so I'm really pissed with them. But anyway, the point is though, that's not going to get you your mortgage paid. That's not going to get you your next game made. The psychological reason why people spend money is because they expect future value. The thing that I am buying will be usable and deliver delight. That's what you spend money on. Do coins fill you with anticipation? Does gems make you shudder with delight? But the things they buy might. The thing is, we've got to communicate the value of what it is we're selling. We've got to communicate the emotional story that goes with that game that means spending money matters. And that's important, not just because of spending money, because hopefully you're noticing that marketing isn't just about getting people aware of your game. It's about game design. It's about monetization. It's about the whole user experience, because these are connected. These are not isolated things. There is a line running through all aspects of your game. And that's what the discipline of marketing is supposed to do. It doesn't always do it. A lot of people focus too much only on the communication. But how can you communicate the value of your game if you don't know what the expectation of delight is? Seriously. Think about that, right? You're going to try and create a message to get people to buy your game, and you don't know what the thing is that's going to motivate them to actually spend money? You think you can do that? I mean, I don't mind if it's a pay up front or a free-to-play game. You have to know what's going to make that player want your game. And you need to know that in every message you send, because it's going to flavor how you communicate. That's why this stuff is so connected. That's why it's so important to get it right. I mean, there are other methods. Obviously, we can use advertising, and there are different methods, particularly, this opt-in process is helping. But again, I don't want to go too much into the sort of like Unity ads and all that kind of stuff, because that's not what this is about. It's interesting, though, because of something I was saying earlier, flow through the game matters. If we want repeatability, if we want to be able to create long-term engagement, we need to think about player flow. If we are constantly creating brick walls, paywalls, ad blocking, banner ads that could be accidentally pressed, if we don't do that carefully, we're going to lose players. And that's the thing we don't want to do. So always think about the flow of the experience of the player. And that can complement, so I'm not going to worry about that. Interesting thing as well is how we give people tastes. Try Before You Buy has a kind of couple of interesting angles to it. So do you remember the old days when you used to have magazines with games on CDs on the cover? Did you know that failed as much as it succeeded? Sometimes that was helpful to the game, but quite often it actually stopped people ever buying it. We found that out when I was working really, really early days, because I am old, after all. I used to run an online gaming service called Wireplay. We had a cover disc, which would have the client on, and we found that games like Wargasm, which there was a game called Wargasm, which is a great name, obviously. Didn't do so well in the US for some reason. Actually, for a number of other reasons as well, which I found out about later when I met the team. Same team that did Motorstorm, by the way. Well, the founder was the same team. But the reason why that game, one of the many reasons why that game didn't succeed is because the game was so good. It was basically Battlefield. You could drive a tank, you could be a soldier, you could fly a helicopter, all in the same game, all way, way before Battlefield existed. And it was all online connected, and we had a fantastic space, but the space was so big, the game was so good, there was no need to buy the full game, because this one level was plenty. Players had such a good time playing the demo, they couldn't imagine how spending $40 or whatever it was at the time would give them more value. Think about that. So what we offer, how we offer it, how we encourage people to try things is incredibly important, because we always have to know what the end goal is. We have to know that by doing this, we have to leave them with an emotional connection with our experience that makes them want more. That's what's going to drive value. And that making them want more might simply be, this game was so good, I'm going to tell my kids about it, and that's why all my friends are going to want to play this game too. And that's fine, because the next game we come out with, hopefully they'll follow us and they'll do more stuff. It applies in every kind of game. So I'd argue that it's actually not about price or payment, but it's about passion. This is a curve I kind of invented for a book I wrote called Games as a Service. It's actually a cheat stolen from a number of other things. This curve here, I don't know if anyone recognizes the shape, but it's the Gartner hype curve, which is basically a way of looking at technology adoption. It's a level of interest and excitement that technology tends to excite. I mean, like, if you think about VR, right? So we're about here at VR time, maybe starting to come down here, where the anticipation of what VR will give us is huge. Everyone's excited. It's fantastic. But the reality, when we actually get them, it's not quite there yet. And so as a result, we'll see a little bit of a dip, but we will then see, as the technology becomes easier, less expensive, more affordable, more engaging, fantastic. The fascinating thing about this is it was talked about a lot in a book called Crossing the Chasm by Geoffrey Moore. Anyone heard of that book before? Yeah, it's a fantastic book, isn't it? It probably had most profound impact on me, other than the first phrase I talked about at the beginning of the slide deck. Because it talked about what happens here. You basically go from an audience of early adopters who are generally familiar with technology in principle, they kind of know what to expect, and then once you get past that, you're starting to address what they call the early majority, who don't have that expertise, who are less forgiving, and if you don't look after them, if you don't hold their hand, and I'm going to use the horrible phrase that came out of that book, cross the chasm or bridge the gap. Anyone heard the phrase bridge the gap? It comes from that book. And it's about holding the hand of that player, that audience, so that you make their experience easier to start. And once they've started, you can get a larger audience, and then you become a more mature product, and then you can get more revenue and be more successful. But without realizing the needs of the first audience is different from the needs of the second audience, you will fail. You will lose them. Free-to-play is similar. Because when we come in to a game, we might be all excited. In fact, we're going to fill the idea of what the game can do with our imagination. We're only going to get a small amount of information from the game developer, but we're going to expect so much more. Because it sounds a bit like this game we liked, it's going to have that feature we loved. Because it sounds like this other thing we loved, it's going to have this other thing. And it doesn't. When we get there and we start playing it, it can't. How can it possibly have all of the things that everybody imagined the game would have? But we did imagine it. So we're going to have that level of disappointment. We also don't know the controls. So we're probably going to be rubbish at it. We might be okay if the controls are fairly standard and familiar, but generally we're still going to find things that we're going to have to learn. But most importantly, we don't know where the game fits into our daily routine. So when we first start playing a free-to-play game, is it any surprise we see something like 60% of people dropping out? Because they're having the worst possible experience they could have. And they may not even have been real target audience. They may have just been looking at it because, it looks a bit interesting. So the people who initially download aren't prospects. They're not customers. They're barely suspects. We suspect they might be interested. That's as far as it goes. But realizing that once they're there, that's not the end of the journey. Realizing we actually have a whole series of stages of life cycle that they are going to go through in our game is going to matter. Why? Because we have to know what messages to tell those people so they keep playing. Retention actually matters too. Retention is incredibly important. So important. This is an older survey we did. Again, about 3,000 developers. This is self-reported again, so don't trust it. But this is what they told us. People who paid and had played for less than an hour in a game said they were willing to spend 66 cents. When those people had said they spent 10 hours or more, they spent $15.15. Retention absolutely matters critically. And it's not just about how much they spend. The proportion of people who will spend more in your game goes up dramatically based on how long they played the game. So if we don't take into account retention in the way we message, why are you going to want to play this game? How do we set up an expectation that you're going to want to keep playing this game for days and months and weeks and years? If we don't communicate that, why would they do it? And obviously engagement really matters. Engagement's kind of a cool thing. We've got to find the right kind of techniques. When you start thinking about monetizing and all this kind of stuff, are we going to put ads here, payment here? How are you going to make this work without breaking the flow, without breaking the engagement? How do you make sure that you find the right time to excite people and to make them anticipate the next thing? How do you create the right mechanics with the right context, with the sense of purpose and progression, and the right understanding of the metagame, the physical things and the social connections that are not the pixels? Why will the social mechanic in your game keep people playing? What is it that makes that matter? How do we build passion? How do we understand how we take the audience that discover us and retain as many of them through the learning stage? We get as many of them through the engaging stage, as many through converting, and then get them to repeat doing that, because we're going to see a diminishing return. How do we change those people who are leaving and make sure that they still tell other people how great the game was? It's too easy to assume this is a money-making machine. It's not. We're making entertainment for an audience. That's why we talked about personas so much. That's why we talked about who our target audience is so much. Because this isn't about making money, this is about creating entertainment. Money is the output of that. But it's also about place. Where are your players when they're not playing your game? What are they doing? Seriously, are they on the bus? Are they at work? Are they playing Candy Crush? Where are they? What are they doing? What media are they using? Do they pay attention to media? How many people read a daily newspaper nowadays? Actually, I don't. Anyone? Anyone read a daily newspaper? Anyone? Yeah, we got one, two-ish, 2.5 people. Well, two halves of people who occasionally. How many people will look at Reddit or Twitter or social media for their news? I do. And it's terrible, isn't it? Because the problem with that, and I think, is that my next slide? Oh, no, it's not there. I have a slide later where I asked the question about echo chambers. But what media do we pay attention to? I will occasionally see television news when I happen to be in the house at the right time and I haven't turned the channel yet, or turned on Netflix, to be honest. There are other. So I'm in Netflix when I'm not playing a game quite often. I could be playing Uncharted 4, but I'm not because my kid wants to watch Walking Dead. Okay? He's 16, it's okay. And he has written more gory stuff than I have. So anyway, the media that matters, what they do, how we communicate them, how we build and sustain our own community, have we got the resources to communicate to people once we find them? And what messages are we going to give them? How are we going to share a commonality with them? How are we going to make them feel like they belong? I often talk about Han Solo when I'm talking about community. I think there's a couple of people who've heard me do this one before. I haven't got a slide saying this, I'm going to say it anyway. How many people know what I mean when I say hand shot first? Anyone know what I mean by hand shot first? Yeah, there's a few of you here. So we know Han Solo, in the original version of the film, shoots Greebo in the cantina, and it matters. And the reason it matters is because if Greebo doesn't get shot in cold blood by Han Solo, then Han Solo's journey as a character hasn't happened. In the special editions in 1986, George Lucas changed it. He made it so Greebo, quite horribly, shot first for no apparent reason. But that destroys the whole point of Han Solo's changed nature. Because at the end of the film, he comes back and he saves the day. Why would Han Solo come back to save the day if he hadn't been affected by his time with Luke and Leia? Why would he do that? Well, if we've seen the journey from him shooting someone in cold blood to coming back at the end, we see that it matters. We see that his experience with Luke and Leia matter. And without it, the whole plot falls apart. And guess what? No one cares. The only people who care about that whole story are the five of us, who put our hands up and said Han shot first. But we belong. We have this shared arcane lore that knows the truth. The truth that Han Solo is the only really important character in the film. Not quite true, but yeah. But that matters to us and nobody else. And that shared knowledge, that shared arcane lore, is a kernel that magnetically connects us. It's something, a shared understanding that we can socially communicate and nod sagely and smile when we hear the kind of definitions and all this kind of stuff. And everyone else is baffled. You don't belong to our little group. You don't belong to our community. And you don't know that you don't belong. That's the really interesting thing is. But the others, this is, by the way, actual psychology as well. I'm not a psychologist, I'm just fascinated by it. This is called social identity theory. Social identity theory is behind a lot of stuff like what languages or accents we use, what style of hats we wear, what scarves we wear, what kind of beards we might grow. They're part of our sense of self-identity, the way we represent ourselves in the world, and they're actually part of the human psyche. The fact that we choose identifiers is incredibly important. It's also how communities work. They're about shared identity as much as they are enjoyment of the game. So you have to understand how you're going to represent the identity of your game to your community to build and sustain it. But you've got to avoid the echo chamber. So I follow an awful lot of game designers, developers, game makers, etc., etc. I follow a lot of people who are atheists, because I happen to be one. I follow a lot of people who have views about whether there should be a monarchy in the UK or not. So I get lots of news about things to do with politics and game design and all this kind of stuff. I don't tend to get a lot of tweets and social media things about leaving the EU because all my friends don't want to. I get lots of tweets and social media about why we should stay in the UK. But all I hear in my lovely world is fantastic stuff. Isn't life positive? Aren't we making some great games? Here's some screen grabs. Isn't that brilliant? Then I look at my wife's Facebook. And my wife's Facebook is basically, if you do not forward this message, all of your friends will die immediately of disease. Seriously. I mean, anyone else get those messages? I do not get those messages. And they're constant. And they're forwarded by people I thought were rational. Seriously. Poison pen letters, chain letters in this day and age. Come on. But that's what she gets. Constant feed of this nonsense. Homeopathy is going to save you. Really? Homeopathy? That's like water? But she's getting all these messages, all these insane comments because of the bubble that her connection, I won't say friends, but a lot of the people she grew up with and went to school with, their bubble is very different from mine. And we miss that. Because we are in a nice, cozy world surrounded by amazing game developers who do great creative stuff, it will be very easy for us to assume that everybody else is like us. Trust me. Go to a consumer game show. Go to a Comic-Con and show someone your game. They don't know who you are, and they don't care. So I'm quite well known with my hat and going around shows and various other things in the games industry. I went to Insomnia, which is the biggest LAN party in the UK. It's a LAN party meets game event, all sorts, loads of YouTubers. I'm wearing my hat, so I'm really identifiable. No one cares. Dan walks by, a syndicate walks by, everyone's in ecstatic. It's like Paul McCartney or Mick Jagger has walked by. These YouTubers are utterly, amazingly important to the audience who play our games. And the people who make games, guess what? They don't care about us. Now, you could say that's sad. I understand that does feel a bit hurtful. After all, we do go through the process of making the game that they love playing, but they do love the games we make. They just don't know or care about who makes it. That's a really important dose of wake-up juice. When you realize that there's a whole massive audience out there who don't know who a developer is, have no connection to you, will never follow you on Facebook, that really opens your mind. Find the people they do listen to. Find the way they do connect with games. That's the way you're going to make it a lot easier for yourself. Also, journalists. Any journalists in the room? Any journalists? No? Anyone who's done PR? A couple of you? So you know about finding a journalist and getting them to write about you. Why would someone write about you? What did you do to convince someone to write about you? You don't know. Well, there's a different question about whether you need to know, but we'll come into that in a second. But what yourself? What made people write about you?
Well, I used to blog, so if I was to blog about something, it's got to be something that I find interesting myself.
Yeah. So interesting. It's a good idea. I think it's about this. Oh, yeah, that one. So I used to do a lot of PR, and I know lots of games journalists. The wider question which we should get to is how important are games journalists nowadays, but that's another subject. But the thing that's always been the case in press relations is, how do I make trouble? Because journalists like to write about trouble. Now, don't get me wrong, they also like an easy life. So make things easy for them, absolutely. But you've got to understand why they should write about you. And what they want to do is write something which is going to be a story, which is going to have a hook, and that hook is going to grab people's interest. And by the way, you can't do that if you don't know who your audiences are, what they want, what their needs are, all this other stuff, why they're buying, what the reason why they would choose to carry on playing, all the stuff we talked about so far, all still consistently comes back to how we can do this as well. It's all connected. How is the little game we're making going to open someone's mind? The problem I was alluding to, I don't know if I get into it this slide, I'll talk about it now though, is journalists in the games industry specifically have an increasingly small effect on your direct sales. It's very hard to measure how much benefit you're going to get from writing in the trade press, from writing in the consumer press, because particularly in mobile, the proportion of people who bother reading game specialist press nowadays and then acting on it is relatively small. It's basically us in the industry. And that's fine, because that's an important market too. It's an important place to communicate to, because a lot of influencers might be reading that article. But don't assume it's going to be the only thing you need to do. It is important to meet people. One of the reasons why journalists will write about me is because I've probably drunk beer with them quite a lot. And that's not just because they like beer. A lot of journalists do like beer, particularly because they don't get paid very much quite often, especially games journalists. Anytime you can buy a games journalist beer, they will very much appreciate it. But also give them an article that they're going to want to write about. In fact, better still, write them an article they want to print and put their name underneath. Really. If you write your press release beautifully that sounds like the tone of voice of the guy who was going to submit it, you've just saved him 4 hours of work or whatever. Fantastic. He likes that. But make sure you're realizing who his audiences are. Audiences? I said that wrong. It's my own native language and I still can't speak it. Whose audience is your audience? Think about those YouTubers. Think about those journalists. they have their own audience. Even your players will often do Let's Plays, and they'll have their audiences too. It's not just a case of, I'm a big games company, I can do this press, and then everything's going to be fine, and it's going to be in a retail shop, and job done. No, we have to realize that not only do we not know everybody, but our audiences also have their own audiences we have no control over. So we have to make trouble to make people pay attention, to make sure they remember us, and tell other people. We have to be worthy of something to say, which reminds us back to the beginning. Why are we making games? Because we want to make a game which is about sharing narrative between friends. Then why is that important? Why is it going to be memorable? Why is that going to be something that connects the audience? Why are they going to talk about that? Why are they going to get excited about that? All of this stuff matters. But it doesn't matter as much as taking action. It's all very well getting someone's attention. How are they going to act? Why are they going to act? How can you reduce the friction between them seeing something about your experience and acting on it? Don't just assume that people will, I know there's a URL there, they'll click on it, they'll go to find the Google page, then they'll go and click on the game, and then they'll install. No, they won't. You, on average, lose half of your audience for every click that people have to make. I used to think I made that up, and then back in the day when we were at 3, we tested it. I built the first product. It was ringtones and wallpapers back in the day at 3, the UK mobile operator. I built the first site. We tested it. We lost half the audience on every click. When I did the games one later, exactly the same proportion. When I did the movies one later, exactly the same proportion. You want to bring content as fast and as close to your user as possible. Do not lose them. And every time they have to do a step that's confusing, you lose them. So how do you reduce the friction between message and action? It's your responsibility. And actually, I'll go back to that. An example of this is payment in Google, in Android. A few years ago, it was really, really bad. And I was working for a small Chinese social mobile platform called Papaya. We built a internal currency that would be shared between games. Because we'd shortcutted the process for each new game, each extra game, the level of revenue we got was equivalent to the iOS marketplace that we got at the same time. So we went from, basically at the time, Android was something like 20% of the revenue of a typical iOS customer. We were getting equivalent. Just because we shortcutted on behalf of the user the way to make payments. That was massive. And then Google took away the ability to use PayPal, which destroyed that, but that's another subject. Anyway, so it's not just about place or proximity to the player, our connections to them. It's also about perspective. We have to step back sometimes when we're thinking about games. We have to step back and we have to think about what the perspective is. Success requires scale. But we need to know, as we said earlier, what success is to us. By knowing that, we can work out what scale is to us. And by knowing that and thinking about the cost of acquisition of customers, we can know whether it's attainable or not. We can also think about what we can do for free. What can be done relatively cheaply. We'll talk about that in a little bit later. But we need to know what scale we need, because otherwise we're fighting in the dark. We have to pay attention to our audiences, where they are, how they're acting, why they're going to act with us, how we can make that as simple as possible, and how we get scale because we've done all those things. Scale means data. If we don't have data, if we don't take an assessment of what people do, why they do it, where they do it, where the audiences are, what other things they do, what surveys, what analysis we can do. There's a whole bunch of qualitative, quantitative, behavioral data, operational data that we can use to make our ability to find and help people love our game more and therefore want to spend money with us. That's going to require paying attention to the infinite detail of our data. Because all we've done so far is make assumptions. We've had these personas, which we started talking about at the beginning. Our primary audience, our secondary audience, and our tertiary audience. We gave them names. We gave those names, ages, gender identities, places that they lived, things that they loved. We made these things up as a thought experiment to understand our game better. But once we've started making a game, once we've really started to promote our game, now we have some actual information. We need to start reassessing all of those assumptions. We need to be prepared to be wrong. Failure is going to happen. But failure in information does not necessarily mean the whole game will fail. Provided we get information fast and we adapt and we've thought about in advance how we can make sure we communicate the right messages, we have a fighting chance. We give ourselves a chance to make the game that we love something other people will love. So show your game to people in person. You want to show it to players, people who you think would like the game. Show it to press. Actually go out and meet them. And actually, one of the things about making people, like journalists, write about you is that they have an emotional connection. They've seen the game and you've excited them. That's going to be amazingly important to their decision to write about you or not. Show it to your peers. Find out other industry people who are going to pay attention to it. Coming to events, I know a few of you in the indie area, showing off your game. That's brilliant. Because you never know who you'll meet. You might meet some crazy guy in a hat who will give you a brilliant idea about how to make your game sell more. Maybe not. Anyway, so I see a few nods there. So show it to peers, but also show it anonymously. There's an interesting problem that happens whenever you do testing. It's like the Heisenberg principle. Whenever you observe things, you affect it. Some physicists in the room, I'm glad to hear. No, I'm not talking about Star Trek this time. We haven't got a Heisenberg compensator. See, I know the right audience are just there. That's the only humor I have. But the point is that if we are present when we show our game to somebody and they have an emotional connection, even if it's just the fact that I'm there, they're going to feel they are required to give you an answer. Sometimes that will be critical, sometimes that will be positive, but it may not be true. They are affected by your presence. We only get really useful information when we're not actually there ourselves. We need third parties who are not emotionally engaged to give us feedback. 2 ways we can do that. Hire somebody to go and test it in clean, easy circumstances. And there are people who do that. We used to do that in Sony. We had an internal team that did that. Or get behavioral data and measure what they actually do. That matters. And it's going to feed back into understanding what they tell us they need from our game and what they actually do in our game. It'll allow us to understand how we communicate our messages better. Because all they said they really like the gold swords, they're actually using the silver arrows. So actually it's the silver arrows that are a really cool thing. Well, how do we communicate the silver arrows better so that people care about them? They're going to put the money into that and therefore make it possible for us to make the platinum oboe or whatever. I don't know why I said that, but you know what I'm saying. Test assumptions, especially if you can do it at scale. We are probably mostly indies in this room, I'm assuming. You may not have the budget, but where you can, always test. Assumptions are the mother of all fuck-ups, I think is the phrase. And then let's get back to what everyone thinks marketing is. So we've just done, basically, the most of this talk has been all the things you don't think marketing is. So most people think marketing is about the communication, about the messages, the adverts. We can talk about that now, don't worry. We're going to actually talk about those. But of course, if you think about it, everything we've talked about, we need. Because how do you define how you're going to create awareness, how you're going to create interest, desire, and action, if you don't know all of the things we've just been talking about? And then you have to own that. You have to own all that information, because otherwise, you don't know what's going to get someone's attention. You don't know what's going to create desire. You don't know what's going to make them act. You don't know what channels are going to have the biggest impact, because if you don't know who your primary, secondary, and tertiary audiences are, if you don't spend time trying to understand where your player is, how can you communicate the right channels? How do you avoid your social media echo chamber? You have to know where players are and the most effective way to communicate to them for the budget you have. What can you do without spending? I am very active on social media. I talk about other people's talks all the time. I build up a persona, hopefully, about what I think is interesting about making games. But that's not enough for making a game based on the Rocky Horror Show. I had to get somebody in to help us out. But it's amazing what you can do because we reached out to the communities that already look after that experience. We went and met them. We shared our passion for something that they enjoyed. And so they talked about us too. That didn't cost us anything. Well, apart from the price of getting in a car and driving over to Dorking, which is about half an hour away from me. That's all it cost. Because I got off my butt and went to meet the guys who cared about the brand that I'm trying to sell. What can you gain by spending a little? Have you seen how easy it is to get Facebook boosts or Twitter promotions? They're actually really cheap. We spent £54 on a Facebook post boost and had 60,000 impressions. It's not massive numbers, but it meant that we got 1,000 likes. Think about that. I went from nothing to 1,000 likes for spending £54. And I can take that audience who've liked and communicate with them because they're now following me on Facebook and they can get all those messages. That's incredibly good value for the kinds of stuff I need to do. I don't do it for every piece of information we put out. Selectively, where we can afford it. It's about being very targeted. Facebook posts, Twitter, these are really effective ways of doing it. Now, but there's also all sorts of other mechanisms. We'll talk about direct response. We'll talk about Unity ads at some point, I'm sure. But you need to think about why players should act. In every message you send out, what is the call to action? What is the thing that would then lead them to do something? Obviously, Facebook, I want to like. But actually, a Kickstarter, I want you to back. How do I make you back? That's not easy, it turns out. Yeah, don't do Kickstarter. No, that's not true. Why will players act isn't enough. Why will they act now? Why will they do it right now? That's the kind of thinking you need to have. You need to be armed, which is a cliched consultant way of saying acquisition, retention, monetization. It's not just one thing. It's not just to getting as many people through the door as possible. We need to keep them. So when we're choosing our sources, we're choosing the way that we acquire, assuming we have budget. In fact, even if we don't have budget, what we're looking for is where's the most effective place that's going to find me the right audience that's going to be most likely to stay playing. And part of the stay playing is in my responsibility about making the right game. And then part of the responsibility I have is then not just making the right game so they retain, but also why they would want to pay or use our ads to get more in the game. It's this understanding of this process that it's not just a one-time hit. It's not just about sheer volume of people and your daily active users. It's about your percentage of people staying as much as anything else. It's about persuasion. Have a call to action now. Act right now. Why should players care about you? Think about that. Communicate that. Make sure it's absolutely clear why. Be fab. Fab is another boring, cliche consultant thing to say. Features are great. It's great that you've got features. How very nice for you. Advantages. So your game is better than somebody else's. Oh, that's brilliant. I'm so glad for you. But actually, all I care about is benefits. Why does it matter to me? So when you think about your game and how you communicate it, understand your features. You have to understand what your features are. You also have to understand why there are advantages over other people's games, but you need to be able to communicate the benefits. And show. Don't tell me. Don't tell me how great your game is. Don't tell me that the Archwizard of Necromondo took over the world and you are the only hero who can save the princess. I've kind of heard that before. Show me. Show me why this is cool. Why this is the thing I need to play. Make it look absolutely clear. Show me how I can get through the experience and want more. Show me where the expectation of future value, where that promise will be delivered on. Deliver on that promise, then you'll get me. Social benefits are going to be part of that because we want the game to actually connect back into experience. Oh, a little side thing. We were talking about journalists as well. This is becoming an industry standard, weirdly. Rami Ishmael did a thing press kit, which is actually really good. If you're going to communicate to press, it's very worthwhile using it, mostly because most press journalists already know it. And so it makes it very convenient. And it also provides you with all the right things to fill in. So be professional. Make sure that when you communicate, your communication is as professional as possible. Interesting debate that happens, particularly when you're talking about, let's say, a video ad. It doesn't, not just video ads, banners or whatever else still apply. How important is it that you have a really nice-looking creative, an interesting-looking creative? So I'll give you an example. The Game of War has quite a buxom woman in the front of the game, and that's how they do their promotion, whereas Magic Piano simply has gameplay. Both are effective for different reasons. But really, what's most effective? Is it showing your game, or is it showing something that maybe your audience might find attractive? I'm not a big fan of the Game of War style ad personally, but it does work. So you have to work out for your game and your audience the best way to communicate. But when you're buying your ad, your customers, if you're paying for your customers on the basis of cost per install, you're paying for how many people you're going to get. So as long as you don't mind how long it takes, you put your price up, and eventually you'll get that number of people, won't you? So why would you worry about the creative, the actual kind of visual experience? Well, I think it does matter because it's about brand. I think it matters because it's about the rate at which people will connect to your game. And actually, I think it will affect how much it costs you to get that audience in the end, because it's about setting up the promise. It's about the Bond moment. Anyone know about that Bond moment? The first 10 minutes of a Bond movie, apart from Spectre, which is terrible. Don't bother, it's just terrible. But most Bond movies have this 10 minutes which have nothing to do with the rest of the plot, and they're amazing. Bond can drive every car, he can fly planes, he can jump off walls and fast cars, women, guns, everything. You know exactly who Bond is. And more importantly, it sets an expectation of what's going to come. And more importantly, it sets a bar at which you know good equals. So when Bond gets beaten up later by the other bad guy, you know that bad guy's even better than Bond. Without which, if you hadn't seen Bond beat everyone up, you wouldn't know how good the bad guy is. Ooh. So your communication is partly about setting expectations. You have to set up the expectation on the player to make sure that works. So in the end, it's about persistence. Marketing is actually not just about the communication, not just about the price, not just about the product, not just about the way you're going to talk to people, not about the audience. It's like rice on a chessboard. So an old analogy, I'm sure some of you know it already. Wow, this is really coming down now. The old analogy is this. If I double the number of grains of rice on each square on a chessboard, it starts off pretty slow, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, not very, but by the time we get to the end of the chessboard, it's enormous. Good marketing is like that. It takes time for its effect to be noticed. There's actually two kinds of marketing, communication. There's the direct response and there's brand building. Things like Unity Ads is about, here is a game. I'm going to show you that game. If you like it, you can go get it instantly. And we can measure that, and it's really directly connected. Here is an audience member. They see this ad. They want it. They play it. They then buy something in the game. We can measure that beautifully. But how do you measure a TV ad like that? Because you don't know someone's watched a TV ad and then clicked on the banner ad or the video ad or whatever else it might be. How do you measure it? It's really difficult. Brand building matters, but it takes time and investment. We know the brands where it works. We know what to expect when we hear about Uncharted 4. We know what to expect when we hear about Skyrim. We know what to expect when we hear about GTA, Call of Duty. These are brands that have had billions of dollars invested in them. We know what it means to play Clash Royale, and that's a relatively fresh brand. So think about the persistence of how you're going to communicate. Not just for you and your game, but your company, assuming you're going to want to make more games. Authenticity is at the heart of that. All of the channels available to us matter. Being authentic and communicating in a synchronized and synergistic, for a horrible word, a combined way, a standard way, really helps. But it's going to come down to budget. The interesting thing is, if we've really paid attention to the process, we already know how many people there are out there that are primary, secondary, and tertiary audiences. We already know what the scale potential we have for our game is. We can choose our budget accordingly. We can choose a budget where we can be as effective as we need to be and still meet our success criteria. Because it's about lifetime value. So we've seen this before. Lifetime value is a factor of how long we keep people playing our game and the way that they change and the way that they adapt and the fact that they will spend more money or likely to spend more money the longer they stay with us. But it's also about understanding the life stages that means, from discovery to learning to engaging, maybe if we're lucky, super engaging and churning. This is a whole different presentation I'm not going to go into. And we ended up with this thing that I put on your chairs. Some of them might still be there. Some of them might be on the floor. What I'm hoping you'll do, this is the thing I'm hoping you'll take away in the last few minutes. Think about who your primary audiences are. Define them, age, identity, what their playing needs are. How frequently during the day, during the month, during the week they play. What the mode of use that they play. What's the function that their game fills in their lives? What devices are they using? Are they using tablet? Are they using mobile? Are they using console? And what's their motivation? What's going to trigger their interest? Write that down. Give them a name. Actually name them here. And then, once you've done that, where are they? Think about the game design. Think about the industry peers that you know. Think about the community that you can tap into or build from scratch. Think about the social media, the trade press, the consumer press, the specialist media that may be unconnected to games that we can target. Can we find endorsement? Are there individuals, either YouTubers or famous people or politicians or whatever else? Can we use brand building advertising in some way that's interesting? Can we use direct response advertising in some way that's interesting? Define what they are for you. And then we need to work out the messages. What's the awareness message? Where is there consistency between these three audience types? How do we create a message that applies to all of them? Not necessarily in every piece. We might have an awareness message inside the game that's designed to appeal to everybody. But we might have trade press, which is going to appeal to our secondary audience, or specialist media that's going to appeal to our tertiary audience. Think about what messages define the audience's progression and how they engage with us. We need to take them from from awareness to interest to desire, action, and still have a message that it communicates why staying in our game matters. That's the practical bit. Because what you end up with, if you use this kind of template, is you realize you've suddenly got yourself a marketing plan. Because you've thought about what message needs to be in which media and how you progress that message over time, which leads to people playing your game. It's not just about playing your game, it's about designing your game. It's about creating the 4 Ps: the product, the price, the place, and the promotion. I hope that's useful. Have I left you shocked there? You're all stunned. Or are you all asleep? So that's it. I mean, I'm going to try and make these slides available to people. I'm hoping that kind of communicates what marketing does, what it should do, and hopefully give you some levers. You had a question? Oh, yeah, only because I was running out of time, I didn't. So I'm going to use my game, my own game, the Rocky Horror Touch Me game, which is a game where my primary audience, I've forgotten the names I gave them, actually, but so let's say Stephanie is my primary audience. She's been a fan of the Rocky Horror Show since 1987, when she first saw it as a film, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is a film. She doesn't play games very often, but when she does, she will like simple puzzle games. Simple. In fact, puzzle games probably not the right definition. It's games which require a kind of meditative state. They're kind of relaxing. They're not about aggressive games. They're not stimulating games in the kind of outgoing sense. More relaxing, sedentary kind of gameplay. She plays them more often than she admits to. Probably every day, maybe 2 or 3 times a day. But her mode of use is generally on her phone when she has a few minutes when she's not doing the other things she should be doing, or at least that she thinks she should be doing. Her motivation is that she actually loves Rocky, and the idea, Rocky Horror, the IP that we're working with, and the idea that she could play a game where she could be listening to the Time Warp, which is one of the main songs from the show, appeals to her, and she would love to just do that and share that with her friends. That's her motivation. So I already know that's a key part of what this game design's about, enjoying the show and sharing it with my friends. Make sense? So secondary audience is John, my 47-year-old IT support guy who used to be a hardcore shooter person. He's looking for something which is high quality. He's used to AAA kind of content, but actually he plays puzzle games more often than not because, frankly, he doesn't have time to learn maps anymore, and he's always been headshot whenever he tries to go back to first-person shooters. His mode of use is actually tablet-based gameplay, and his motivation is he saw Rocky Horror a couple of times, never got dressed up, because you get dressed up with Rocky Horror, you get stockings and suspenders, and seriously, there are photos somewhere. Don't make sure you've eaten lunch before you see photos of me. Don't, but anyway, his motivation is he quite likes it, and it's a bit of fun, and he just likes the idea of putting his friend's Facebook profile picture on front of a scantily clad man with stockings and suspenders, and then putting that on Facebook. He finds that appealing. And then tertiary audience is Ellie. Ellie is a 16-year-old who really enjoys Glee, the TV show Glee. She saw the episode of Rocky Horror on Glee, and as a result, she kind of likes the idea. She plays a lot of rhythm action dance games. She plays Just Dance with her friends. They share videos. They do all sorts of great things with that. The idea of playing a dancing game really appeals to her. So I'm making a rhythm action dance game that's got this kind of nice, sedentary, kind of relaxing, meditative sort of feel to play, and it happens to be all about social sharing. So that's why I've done that, because these are the audiences that I've done that with. Then, moving on from that, game design has been all built around the idea of building awareness. It's a really good-looking game. We spent a lot of money working with some of the leading concept artists in the UK. The guys that did the concept art for No Man's Sky. So we've made sure it looks really good. We've delivered it in a way that's really beautiful. We're trying to make sure that the gameplay also has within it the ability to have social sharing, but we've tried to make that motivational, so it's competitive social sharing, but it's also, look what I've got. So it's not just about performance, it's also about I've got more things than you, kind of social capital. So that's going to help drive awareness, we hope, because we're capturing a video of everyone's gameplay as they're playing it, and then we're going to embed the actual dance moves that person made inside the metadata of the game. So that's giving me awareness, and I can go on other things. Let's say industry peers, we went to GDC, we went around and showed things as a video on our Kickstarter, showing off to people and getting their feedback. And again, we can talk about how we're trying to basically use bribery. So I've offered my consultant services for free for people who back us for a certain price. Little things like, it's an expensive price, but all sorts of things like that. But again, it's all about working out trade press. So we reached out to VentureBee, Pocket Gamer, GamesIndustry.biz, Develop, all sorts of other things like that, most of whom I know personally. So we got coverage everywhere. We reached out to specialist press, The Stage, and we told them this game is available. Next thing was, this game is going to be on Kickstarter. The next thing is, this thing is now on Kickstarter. Later on, it's going to be, this game is now available to demo in soft launch. This game is now available to launch. So we're building these sets of processes. What's in it? If you back us now, you're going to get access to this content for free. You're going to get access to that for free. We're giving you all these messages that time out each message, and each message progresses to the next stage. Is that a reasonable example? Fair. No, it's a new game because I'm making it. It's not out yet. Go for it.
What do you think about like influencers?
Influence, yeah. So that's what I mean by endorsement. So, actually, no, there's two things. Sorry, you're right. There's two things. There's the industry peer, and there's the endorsement. So, industry peer, amazingly important. Getting people, particularly the audience you're going for. So, if you're making an indie game and you can get Mike Bittler or Rami Ismail to support you, their community audience is probably going to be very helpful. I actually snuck in a video of Mike Bittler playing my game at GDC in the hope that some fanboys would notice. No one's noticed. Well, a couple of people, but only industry people. But industry peers, absolutely, their endorsement is great, but we have to worry about the echo chamber that they exist in. They exist in the developer community echo chamber like us. When you talk about the endorsement, lots of things you can do. So, for example, we're currently looking at people who previously acted in the stage show for Rocky Horror. Can we find them to endorse us?
Like Tim Curry.
Well, we'd love to get Tim Curry. We're not going to get Tim Curry. I've tried. I've tried Jason Donovan as well, who was also in the show. Meatloaf. I'm trying. But, I mean, obviously, if we got, say, Patricia Quinn, who's still, she was Magenta and is actually the lips in the film, although she wasn't singing it, which is weird. But Patricia Quinn just followed us the other day on Twitter, and we don't know if it's a real Patricia Quinn or not yet. We're still trying to work that out, but that would be great. Here's somebody who was in the original film and importantly, the original stage show in 1973. Not just because we're the theatre show, not the film. But that's amazing because it adds to authenticity, it adds to brand credibility, and they bring their audiences with them. So it's not just about the people that they bring with them, it's the message that their endorsement brings. And people will pay celebrities to endorse their products because of the shadow that brings. The brand identity of that celebrity and the audiences they bring with them can be incredibly powerful. I would also add, sometimes, I haven't included it in this, and kind of sometimes they get fitted into endorsement, sponsorship. The act of a big company to sponsor a small event can be incredibly powerful as well. Because you're immediately saying, I'm the kind of company that's going to help this kind of event happen. So the connection, the authenticity between me and that event, what that says about me as a brand can be incredibly powerful. And I'm not even focusing on an individual spokesperson at that point. I'm focusing on what that brand of that event is about. So imagine if I sponsored a Comic-Con or a section in Comic-Con, what that would say about me as a game brand. So that's the kind of, does that make sense? Does that answer the question? Mm-hmm. Cool. And I don't know how much longer we've got. I'm happy to carry on answering questions forever till they kick me out my cold dead corpse. Anyone else got any questions? Have I bludgeoned you too much? I was told to do an hour and 45 minutes on this. So, I'm hoping it was useful. It is a crash course in marketing. I'm hoping the connections I was trying to make made sense. And the fact that marketing doesn't begin and end when you finish the game. It's how you define what game you're going to make. And even if you don't think you've planned that out, the very fact that you've thought about what game you want to make means you've already made assumptions. If you don't take the time out to think about the audience and the consequences of those assumptions, how successful do you think you ought to be? Think about that. If you haven't decided how people who are going to play your game are going to be affected by the game design decisions you're making, do you really deserve to be successful? Marketing is about identifying and satisfying consumer needs. It's not about making money, although it helps. It's not about finding audiences, although it helps. Actually, it is kind of about finding audiences. But the point is, we succeed because we've decided to focus on the player and what brings them delight. We don't succeed because we throw money at a problem. Thank you.